Good evening and welcome to Season 2 of the Hooked on Marin Speaker Series. My name is David Donnery. I'm the Assistant Town Manager for the Town of San Anselmo and a proud member of the Hooked on Marin Organizing Committee. Hooked on Marin is a collaboration between the towns of Corte Madera and San Anselmo, the City of Larkspur, and the College of Marin and Tamalpais Union High School District's community education programs. I would like to take a moment to thank a couple of organizations who are helping to support this year's Hooked on Marin series. Thank you to Sir Francis Drake High School and to the Jackson Miller, who is handling the tech portion of this evening's program. Also, thank you to the Community Media Center of Marin for helping produce what will be a video of this event that will be available on YouTube in about a month. We're very excited about tonight's topic, Inside the Star Wars Model Shop. And tonight's guest, we're honored to have Lorne Peterson, longtime chief of the ILM Model Shop. Lorne came on board during the making of the first Star Wars, or the fourth one, and continued to work with Lucasfilm throughout the birth of Industrial Light and Magic and stayed for a while, amassing a more than impressive body of work. So without further ado, as we all have had enough ado for one day, it's my pleasure to introduce the host of Hooked on Marin, the fabulous Terry McGovern. Terry is one of San Francisco Bay Area's most versatile performers. He started his movie career with George Lucas, including Star Wars. He also appeared in American Graffiti, Mrs. Doubtfire, and 9 Months. Terry teaches commercial and character voice, as well as scene and monologue acting at his own Marin Actors Workshop at the College of Marin. Ladies and gentlemen, Terry McGovern.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Good. Okay. Well, this is the listen. We have so much fun putting these events together, and we're growing slowly. I want you to know you are charter members. We'll be saying, back in the day, we had, remember Lorne Peterson come over there. Some of you are in the audience, but it is catching on because what we've dedicated ourselves to is for finding, for people like you, the lucky residents of Marin, things about Marin County specifically. What are you pointing at? Am I okay? Oh, I thought you were directing me back into a light or something. See how obedient actors are? Well, am I okay here? Where's my mark? But that's actually Mark. Mark, what do you do? So tonight we get to explore with him the magic that is the magic of ILM, Lucasfilms. And where does that come from? It comes from really, really brilliant people. And George Lucas assembled them. It was a very, very small crew that, by comparison, that turned out that first Star Wars. And you're going to find out what they're wizards, man. That's all I can say. As a person who's grown up out in the dark watching movies, it's come a long way from Mothra and Godzilla collapsing the cardboard Tokyo. What these artists create defies belief because it is so real. How can it be happening? How can the Golden Gate Bridge be crumbling before our eyes? How can the Millennium Falconer suddenly appear over our head? I don't know, but I did find out because I've gotten to hang with Lorne Peterson, and we get to hang with him tonight. I just want to do one thing very, very quickly in introducing him. I have, 14, 16-point type, 3 pages of his filmography. So, just want to lie back and relax. No, I'm just going to mention a couple. Peter Pan, Lemony Snicket, AI, Artificial Intelligence, Evan Almighty, Mission to Mars, Men in Black, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, Jumanji, with our friend Robin, Congo, In the Mouth of Madness, Star Trek Generations, another Jurassic Park. It goes on, and Ghostbusters, Caddyshack 2. Okay, well, that's the one we want to focus on tonight. Okay? I want to focus on either that or apparently one of your last films, Drag Me to Hell. Okay? But he's just done everything there is to do with this wonderful art of miniatures and model making. He's been rewarded this morning when I was at his house. I still haven't gotten over it, haven't washed my hand. I got to hold his Oscar. Man, they're heavy. That's okay. I'm not complaining. But it's really an honor to introduce this man, Oscar winner, artist extraordinaire, artist first and foremost, who has turned his love of art and his craft and his incredible knowledge of so many facets of movie making. Here he is with us tonight, our friend and neighbor, Lorne Peterson. I guess we're going to do the sit-down thing. You'll have that. Or would you prefer to have the wireless mic?
That doesn't matter.
Okay.
You know, what he was talking about, I wish my mom would have been here and heard things like that. That would have been... I don't think she's ever been somewhere where I've stood up on a stage or did any of that kind of stuff. She had seen Star Wars, but I asked her how she liked it back in '77, and she said, well, it was very noisy.
Yeah.
That was the only thing that she had to say about it.
Boy, I don't want to upstage you. Let me get down here a little bit. Yeah. Where in the heck do we start with you? Well, why don't we just briefly discuss, is this on? Hello?
Yeah, there it is.
Feelings
there it
low. Is. So, what you have, ended up doing is, along with your colleagues, completely revolutionized the idea of illusion making in films through the use of miniatures. How do you make things so small? How do you make this all work so that the sense of proportion is that it's a giant thing instead of a tiny thing?
Well, I made things since I was a little kid and all that kind of stuff, and the people that you work with are, artists, engineers, had been architects. There's a whole variety of skills that come into it, even chemistry and physics, and you just work with a whole variety of different people that you can draw upon these skills, and you work at it for long enough, you know them, and they add their part to the heap, But there's a bunch of little rules that eventually realize that when you sculpt miniature people, make them thinner than they really are because on camera, just like models, they'll look
like real people.
Yeah, they're just like real people. They'll look fat, they'll look thicker than you would, and the same thing goes for all kinds of models. Don't make a lot of rounded corners where the light shines on the edge. Make the edges sharper, because it'll give away the scale of things. There's just zillions of things like that. Little tricks, and I don't say that I necessarily knew them when I was 29 years old, but I've been at it for a long period of time.
Some of the earliest model making and use of miniatures in movies, the one that always comes to mind first, because I think it was pretty advanced at the time, was King Kong, the original film of King Kong.
Yeah, I wasn't born then. What was it like? No.
But you have to go, and that didn't happen very often. That kind of really good model animation didn't happen in the movies. And then suddenly, how did it change? It seemed to have changed right here in San Rafael at ILM.
You also know that I never was really a student of film. It is like, yes, I think I saw King Kong and I saw Harryhausen movies, those kind of things. But I saw thousands more westerns and Flash Gordon type of movies and the things like that on TV. But I couldn't. I worked with people that lived and breathed film and know every little aspect. A friend of ours, Rick, knows many times things more about films, and even science fiction. I think in my life I've probably read about 5 science fiction books, and when I was in college, the Dune series was really big, and I'd read maybe 3 of those. So I don't. My colleagues are pretty steeped in. A lot of them are steeped in film and science fiction.
For you to
no, it wasn't.
Have a sense of film history.
Yeah.
But to have a sense of how to make things look real. A lot of math in this work, right?
Well, yes, math.
Because you were trained first as an architect.
Yeah, right. But junior high school kids would be impressed with the math we would use. I spoke to a cousin of mine is a junior high school math teacher, and she approached me, and I knew her when she was a little girl, and when she became older, she says, "Oh God, come to Arizona to my school, and I got a math class, and I thought Star Wars and math, and then I started thinking about physics, math, chemistry." the physical world, and it was just absolutely perfect. It hit the nail on the head, whereas if it had been a high school or a college math class, it would have left them yawning, the old Pythagorean theorem and that kind of stuff, and scaling and simple algebra, and we certainly use that stuff every single day, which then, leads you to all kinds of other things,
And yet, of course, to be able to do it on the spot is one thing, but a great deal of planning goes in, storyboards, all kinds of drawings first before you begin the process, right?
Yeah.
What was the...
I was just thinking a minute ago about numbers and seeing things, and I was in is it Smart and Final or some other foods down on Anderson, and a very small 5-foot tall woman, and I was trying to get something specifically a size for something else, a tray, aluminum tray, and she said, "Well, would you like me to get a tape measure for you?" And said, "Oh, I don't need a tape measure, because you can, I can tell 6 inches from 20 feet away. I can tell 7 inches from 20 feet away, or that kind of thing." And I said, it's this. I said it's this size, and she still went and got the tape measure, and it was the right size. And I said, well, and from your elbow to your tip of your fingers is 15 inches, because you're 5 foot tall. And she didn't tell me she was 5 foot tall, but the height of, and this was an old lady. It was like 15 inches from tip of her finger, and she measures it, and her eyes light up, and like I'm a magician or something like that. And it's just that's a quarter of your height. So you use that when you know how far across it is there, and how 18 inches from here to here, and from there to there is 3 feet, and you just know that stuff, and then you have to be able to judge. Things at distance, how big they are, that kind of stuff, and you just years and years and years of doing that stuff, and that's just a part of you.
Yeah, there's a fascinating story. I don't want to get too involved in it, because I know a lot of people are anxious to see the visuals. Come on, that's what
Star Wars.
That's what
visuals.
the man is all about. But before we get there, I was hoping you would explain again how you came to be hired onto this space movie, right? Wasn't that it? You ran into a friend?
Yeah, I ran into a friend, and you know that I can't see you normally, but
they're very nice-looking people.
Very, a lot of people in this audience would know that it was a very difficult time in 74, 75, the energy crisis and all that kind of stuff. And I worked in industrial design. The job disappeared. There were very few jobs to come by, so I started a small company of just me and a friend. And we did anything that anybody wanted us to do along design and models. And one of the things I did was there was a parks next to McDonald's that had a big hamburger slide and the hamburger swings, and these were big sculptures. And I did those originals. They the next stage down from McDonald's hired me to do those, and I didn't reproduce them. I just made the originals and then handed them off to someone else to make molds, so they could send them to Topeka or Kansas City or whatever.
But this is what does the work.
Yeah.
This is an art. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that
This one,
computer graphics art, but
Yeah.
This is the human hand and his eye and what he's able to do, how he's able to take a material and completely transform it with his hands, especially if his hands have one machete each.
Yeah.
Right?
Or sometimes we've even sculpted with a chainsaws, that if you have to do it really quickly. I started out sculpting something once, and somebody said, "Oh my God, it has to be done by Friday." So
my son's bar mitzvah is coming up.
Yeah.
Could you do that?
But
Let's get to these wonderful videos, Lorne.
So what we're going to do is first show what I call the wow reel, and it's just it's a whole series of segments of films that emphasize models. There is very little CG work, only very near the end, but it's all from the late 70s, early 80s on, and it goes about 11 minutes or something like that. And I'll talk a little bit about it. I hope the sound is loud enough to be dramatic. There's a symbol for ILM, the light bulb and the gear. A little bit more volume if we have it. This was the iconic shot at the beginning of Star Wars, and this big white Star Destroyer was only ever so slightly more than 3 feet long, and yet it looks like this on film.
Jax, maybe we could lose the spotlight altogether while this is showing.
Good idea.
There we go.
Used underwear elastic for the rope.
Used underwear elastic?
The ghost was the secretary in the front office. And this melting head it's all made out of gelatin, different layers of gelatin. In this scene, only the boys in the foreground are real. Even the trees, we made the trees and the spaceship and the ground and the sky.
So how big is that model?
It's about 18 inches in diameter. Now this is in a way we did little prototype shots to show everybody that we're on the same page. We used either Barbie dolls or in this case little Princess Leia dolls. And we used the trees left over from E.T. And this is the way we actually did it. And this was filmed in Samuel P. Taylor Park. Has a similar ending. Now, everything you see are models here, except when there's a close-up of the actors. The little mine cars are about 7 inches, 8 inches long, and the cave is all made out of crushed aluminum foil that's all been painted and textured. Very thick aluminum foil. The water tank's probably about 7 feet in diameter. They're very big models.
Now you said when you work with water, fire,
yeah,
the models have to be bigger.
Yeah. Every time, you can't scale down fire nor water. You know, a water droplet is as big as a water droplet is, and so you have to make the models much bigger to make either water or fire effective. Now, this was in Ghostbusters 2, and in Marin we found a very tall guy, about 5'2", 3", but probably weighed 145 or 50 pounds, and we put him in a rubber suit.
Now you said 5 feet too. You mean
oh, did I?
Yeah.
He was about 6 foot, over 6 feet.
Okay. Skinny boy.
Now these, except for close-ups of the actors, these are planes that are about 15 feet in wingspan. And we bought truckload after truckload of Christmas trees to burn them up. It's a boat about 10 feet in length or something like that. And this train, we only got to shoot this shot once. And the train is about 2 feet tall at the smokestack, 3 feet. No, 2.5 feet tall. And it was shot in a quarry here in San Rafael. It's kind of amusing that when we do shots like this, it's as if every object has like 80, 50-gallon drums of gasoline inside of it. Because, things don't really burn quite the same way. Airplanes don't burn up like that. But they're dramatic, for a dramatic effect, it's necessary, or effective. Yeah, it was for Backdraft, and this was for Rocketeer. This was a very large dirigible we made. It was probably 25 feet long, and shot up at Hamilton Air Force Base when it was. We're going to be showing some stills.
That's really called economy. They're what they were flying.
Now, the baby was not put in jeopardy for this.
Doesn't look that way, pal.
Yeah.
That looks scary.
And neither was Tom Cruise put in jeopardy. The helicopter is probably about 2.5 feet long, and we made this tunnel that the camera pulls down on the track very quickly.
You got to admit, he is really good at physical stuff.
Yeah, running, anguish, looking concerned. He's really good at that. All of this was a model except for the Martians. They are computer graphic generated. And this was a large, about a 25-foot boat we made that crashes into the dock. Only the people running are real. This is Men in Black. That the ship, their spaceship's probably 12 foot in diameter, something like that, 10, 12. Had to formulate the dirt that would do that kind of thing. Regular dirt won't do that. This was a really big model for Mummy. It was at least as big as this stage right here. It's kind of, this is, at this stage, it's a combination of model, live action, and computer graphics. And this little sequence really illustrates well how the combination happens. Here they would switch to a wall. I think it was in North Africa, like that. As the years went by, we kind of made desktop models for the first Star Wars. And then the model shop really started to do these big environmental models after 20-some years or so. And usually when you see something like this, only a very narrow strip of the staircase is really real. And in this case, the ground.
So that area that's going to be filmed by computer graphics, when photograph has to be in blue, right?
In the case of that Theed City, it wasn't. It was painted like it would normally be. But the actors themselves would be walking on blue. But then they can be put into a scene, blue or green. Now, this was Space Cowboys with Clint Eastwood, and it's all a really big model, and only the character is a computer graphic. And then they put Clint Eastwood's. You can't see it much, but later in the film, you can see that it's Clint Eastwood's face, and they put that in there with the computer. This is a really well-engineered, large model, that had all these moving parts and everything to it. It was all radio motion control. This is regular speed, and then this is slow down speed, and you can really see how more effective it is seemingly really large and heavy. For the film Pearl Harbor, the destruction of Tokyo. There was a period of time we got into miniature neon too. That the buildings around here are like 6 foot tall or something like that. That we just did a whole bunch of this miniature neon.
This is for AI.
Yeah, for AI, yeah.
Artificial
As is this, too. And this also, like I said, with water, you have to make the object really big, because that lion is probably about, 8 feet tall or something like that. But the buildings behind it aren't, they're combined. They aren't really in the same picture. As time went on, there was the combination of models and CG really worked well. The composites were actually better. The blending of the two became very, very precise. This kind of illustrates when you needed to show something underwater, you just actually use smoke. You don't actually use water. This is a really big model. For something like this, we bought zillions of Japanese maples and any kind of a plant at a nursery that looked like it was a good scale, because we'd build those kind of forests for a shot like this. And in this case, only the actors and a few pieces are actually there on the set. The rest of it's a model.
So you're watching it in real time, which means it's going by very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But you're able to see whether or not everything is going to be there when you see the slowed down version.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
part of the run.
This was a big carving of foam. We used like surfboard foam. That wall back there is, maybe 10 feet tall or so. But we'll eventually show you some stills that kind of show each of those, almost all of those different shows, kind of with human beings working on the show, making the thing work.
The genius of Lorne Peterson and his friends at ILM.
You can't say the word genius too often. I've actually worked with all these people, and
That's all right.
Yeah.
We're not going to let it leave the building, okay?
Yeah.
Now, come on, you deserve it.
Yeah.
Before we get back into the highly technological stuff, do you still work with your hands? Do you have any kind of projects at home where you work with clay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily
'Cause you're a
clay,
sculptor.
but when I was in art school, I probably should have just stuck to three-dimensional art. Mm-hmm. I did both, but as time went on, it turned out that was what I was better at. But also, when we started Star Wars, there was only 7 model makers. So the 7 tended to do a little bit of everything. You did some mold making, you did painting. Out of 70 people to do Star Wars. Whereas by the time we did Sith, what's the last one, there was about 102 model makers, and CG artists were like 600 CG artists. There was about 2,000 employees. So we grew from 70 people to around 2,000 people to do the variety of films and to do George Lucas's films. But what happened over the years was you start out with 7 people, you do a little bit of everything. Well, eventually different people have more specific skills. And, it turns out that some people are better painters, and so they head off into the painter stage. And some people are better sculptors. They do more of the sculpture. Some people, I used to say you'd hire some employees that would be really good at doing something only an inch apart or 6 inches, 8 inches, and just doing it really precise. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't be the same person that you would use to build something as big as this stage. It's as if it's in people's bones they have a certain scale span that they work at. And you don't get an engineer that works like that does Mount Rushmore. They're different people.
Right. And apparently Mr. Lucas had a skill of assembling a hell of a band, didn't he? Put together a good group.
He did. It's interesting how he did it, though. He's really good at delegating. So he hired a few people that hired more people, that hired more people, that hired more people. So I would say you could maybe count on within ILM, you could maybe count on one hand the people that he actually hired.
Tell this story, if you would, please. You told me earlier today about you being a little uncertain if he was going to like what you had done on a film or in prep, and so you wanted him to take a look at it.
Yeah. I knew that his time is limited, and this particular day he was going to be coming through the model shop. They told me that. They wanted to see certain things. And this was, I think, in Empire Strikes Back. And I had just moved up from L.A. 6 months earlier, a year earlier. And I had originally made a list of about 10 things that I wanted to ask him to kind of see what direction he wanted to head, or what just the general feel of what he liked. And so I knew that 10 was an awful lot, so I narrowed it down to about 4 and kind of made them a little bit more specific. And there we were standing, I think we were alone. We came to the model shop, at least there's the two of us, and I told him that. I said, it could be helpful if I had this kind of direction, and I have about 4 questions and these categories. And I started the first one, and I started into the second one, and he said, gosh, that sounds like your job to me. And it was just, it was his.
Gosh.
Yeah, you eventually learn that he's not going to sit over anybody's shoulder, and he's not. He hired the people that hired the people that hired the people that are going to do what he wants. Yeah. And when he gets to the editing room, he'll do his magic, but it's not going to spend time doing the nuts and bolts of things.
Before George Lucas and ILM and you and all your wonderful colleagues came along, you guys caused quite a stir in movie making. Of course, you had a great vehicle to work with Star Wars. But you really seem to usher in a new kind of way of tricking us. And what can you talk about some of the older technique? And then I'd like to, after we do that, I'd like to then take a look at how CG and model making are getting along.
Getting together, yeah. Along those lines, I one time, in my own kind of semi-Pollyanna way, sometimes I said, oh yeah, computer graphics and models, it's like a hand-in-glove situation. And one of the women at work in production said, yeah, but sometimes it's a hand-and-fist situation, a fist-in-glove situation. Fist-in-glove, and they said, yeah, it is. It's a fight sometimes.
So what were some of the things ILM was able to improve on when you got this opportunity to
Well, quite frankly, what it was, when we did Star Wars, I was one of the third oldest person, and I was 29 years old. So there was I think one person that was 32 and another one at 33 or something like that. But everybody else was younger. Oh, there was another person that was there were 3 people older than me. So everybody ranged between 19 to about 32. And, God, I forgot quite.
Well, I was talking about, what is it that ILM...
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah. A guy named John Dykstra took a number of different elements together, and he realized that we could create a motion control system that were controlled by rudimentary computers. And we actually had to build the computers. They looked like refrigerators, but they ran, and their memory was actually audio tape rather than solid state, computers. But they all had to be built, and then the camera rigs that ran on tracks, that was like a big camera on an arm that you could program that did all this stuff. Well, that was this real innovation. And it was one of the reasons why ILM had so little competition for so many years. I think we did something like 75% of the special effects in the world.
Yeah, within those first few years, you did everything.
More than even the first few years. It lasted almost into the 90s. Wow. That we were doing 75% of all the special effects in the world. And it was because it was very difficult for people to come up with the magic elements that put all those little elements together that some people would try. And I remember Disney came up with a system, also a track camera, but every once in a while it would go wild. It actually drove itself into a model one time on a film called Black Hole, and it destroyed part of a model they had to rebuild. And of course, cameramen have to work around something like that all of a sudden just has a memory that this big 100-pound thing goes flying through the air. It left them feeling insecure. So it wasn't what I was doing wasn't the key element that made it ILM so different than special effects that went before. Because there were certainly good model makers that did great ships and all that kind of stuff, but
And
it was the way they shot them.
I'm sorry. Dykstra was a part of the original team over there?
Oh, he was the
guy.
Brought birth to the thing.
And that was the man who gave us 2001 with Kubrick, right?
It's an even longer story than that. You're thinking of what's that? Trumbull. Hey, God, that's great. Doug Trumbull.
Doug Trumbull, I am.
Because
Right,
Doug
right.
Trumbull came back from 2001, and he hired John. Because what had happened is they said, okay, if you'll go to England for several years and work and commit to several years in England, we will let you do 3 small budget projects. And one of those was Silent Running. And what he did was he used a decommissioned aircraft carrier in Long Beach Harbor. I went to Long Beach State. John Dykstra went to Long Beach State. He went up to the art department and the design department to find cheap labor. And that was the start of the story. And John Dykstra was a design student, and he became, but he kind of had the vision from the very beginning of how things could put together. I mean, even at one time, somebody high up in production said, well, why don't we just take the spaceships and put a guy in a blue suit and you can move him around the room, and shoot him like that. And, instead of just saying, take that person outside and shoot them. People said, oh, you're interesting. And then went ahead and did the computers and the tracks, knowing that that wasn't a system that would work,
He was probably very proud of himself, though.
Yeah.
I solved the problem, Shirley.
There were some people would just think how out of touch with the physical world are. I remember someone, not within ILM, when I had to do lava for Congo, and I was having to try and come up with different formulas of the material for the lava and the look of the lava and everything. And somebody said, oh, I saw this program on TV where the molten out of cauldrons, they poured hot metal out of thing, and it looked just like lava. Maybe you could do something like that, without ever realizing that, molten steel is, thousands of degrees hot, and you'd kill people, and you'd have to build these giant steel.
But it would look great.
Troughs, and you didn't say, God, that's outrageous. You just said, oh, yeah, interesting.
And speaking of volcanoes, didn't you work on Joe and the Volcano?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just funny that at different times, films will, all of a sudden there'll be train movies. There'll be trains. We did Out of Africa even had the train in the very beginning was a model. No one ever thinks of Out of Africa as being a model show, but it was. And then there'll be boat shows like Pirates, and then there'll be spaceship movies, but they all kind of make a run at it, for a while. You say, oh, now we're doing boat movies that, they made big money, so the other boat movies will probably make big money too.
I just had an opportunity years ago to be driving back there in Santa Fe on Kerner, and I heard this noise, this explosion, pulled the car over, cyclone fence, bunch of people running around, blowing up a boat in a tank.
Yeah.
And that was part of
For
Pirates
Pirates
of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And it was extraordinary, even though I know it's magic and the technique is so advanced and so sophisticated. But to see this happening in real time on a sunny afternoon looked like just a bunch of guys at a party blowing something for the hell of it. And then it makes this transformation into the film, and everything is brought down to us, with such immediacy.
Yeah.
And these shots have got to all be figured out well in advance, right?
Yeah, they do. Partly because a lot of money can be spent, if just kind of doing it okay and playing and all that kind of stuff.
Can it be tedious sometimes, this work?
Tedious. It never came to me very often. There probably was periods of time. It probably had to do with being really tired, because we would. We always worked 10 hours a day, and lunch wasn't included. And I hired the very first woman at ILM. This is a little bit of a long story, but I would ask the employees, like, well, what do you want? What don't you want? What do you like? What's been happening that hasn't been agreeable to you, and all that stuff. And immediately, one of the guys, sticks his hand up and he says, we're really tired of the fact we're working so many hours, we can't have dates, and there's no women. we want women here. So I went out in 1980, 79 or 80, because it definitely was a business that mainly were men in. Now with CG it's about 50-50. But Barbara was the first woman in the model shop, except for the secretaries in the front. I started hiring the first women, and but there was only like 3 receptionists and a secretary and that kind of an accountant. But Barbara told me later. She said that when 6 o'clock came around, she kind of cleans up her desk and gets her stuff like that, and she looks around and everybody's still working.
All right.
And so she thought, oh my God, well maybe they work till 6:30. So she starts working again, and then the clock gets towards 6:30, and she starts cleaning up again and everything, and seeing that nobody's moving. and then 7 o'clock came, and people started moving. But she said that she was so tired the first, like 4 months or something like that of working an 11-hour day.
It's physical. I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing. I know people out here have tons of questions. You have tons of pictures to show us. But I just want to ask you one final question, just between the two of us here. What did CG, computer graphics, do to the model maker in terms of pushing him aside, reducing his amount of work, or his opportunity to be creative?
There was good and bad parts of it. Like she said, the fist in glove part of it. But you can see the difference between an optical composite, which was the E.T. ship and the boys, and it looks a little funkier these days. Whereas think of now the Egyptian one with the mummy, with the horses and all that stuff. So CG could really put objects into a model just precisely, and just exactly right, the lighting right and everything that. So that's a really good part about it. CG, when we first started doing models in the first Star Wars, they were all tended to be desktop size, like under 8 feet, 6 feet tall, long, and that kind of thing. And eventually, as time goes on, that's the thing that CG was the best at the first, at making spaceship models. And then we, as the model shop, started doing more environmental models, bigger than this. Sometimes Mustafar for Sith was bigger than this room here. But we got pushed into a bigger, more physical type of model making.
Creating the setting.
Yeah, creating the set and the setting. But granted, I know from my doctor that I spent more time on my knees, sculpting and crawling underneath the things than I would have. What's that?
Shot the meniscus.
Yeah. The meniscus is only this thick now, and it used to be, because it became more physical. It really, whereas you worked on something that was desktop size, and all of a sudden now you're making something this room, size of this room, and it's a much more physical, ladders and platforms and underneath the stages. And I remember doing a duck walk underneath of a stage that we'd built about 4 foot tall. And
Chuck Berry duck walk.
Yeah, when I got outside, there were some guys in their 20s that said, pretty good for a 55-year-old guy. That's when I was 55. I'm more than that now, but.
I want to mention two things really, really quickly. And
because we got to get the visuals.
Yeah, but this is because, ego, granted I have one, but this is the influence of Star Wars. In 1974, 5, I guess, I was invited up to the house on the hill, and along with some other actors, after guys, voice actors. And we're sitting around in George's room. I'd worked on a couple of his other things. And he said, start reading these. And he handed out pieces of paper, scripts. And Ben Bird had his little Nagra recorder, and he walked around, and we'd look at the script and go, all right, what is this? Stop, there they go. Blast them. Finally, we're looking at each other and laughing, a room full of adults who were doing this silly stuff. And we said to George, what the hell is this? He said, oh, well, it's a thing in the space. And one of the older guys said, oh, a space opera, huh? Well, show us something. And we all got to sit down and look, and the room grew dark, and the screen dropped down, and onto the screen came the Death Star. No crawl, no in a galaxy far away, just the sustained shot of the Death Star. And then it blew up.
And that was it.
and the house lights came up. We still didn't have any idea what was going on. Yeah. I ended up having a line with Alec Guinness. You talk about, I can go to my grave. Yeah. Because in that wild round-robin session that we had there, Ben Burt grabbed audio tracks and put them with different things, just random things.
Yeah, Ben Burt was the sound designer who lives just a little ways over that way.
Right, just a couple of blocks from you. And so I ended up, purely by happenstance, to have this exchange with Alec Guinness in the film. The Sand Trooper, these are not the droids you're looking for. Move along. Do you know how much mileage I got out of that? Over about 30 years. But here's the thing about mortality, folks. I found out from some buddies of mine at ILM up at the Mayflower one night. They said, George is digitizing it. He's throwing out all the voices. He's going to have the guy who does Boba Fett do all of the... but anyway, it was fun while it lasted. The other connection here with Hooked on Marin is Dave Donnery, who is a very, very important man. And he is part of our team here that helps put these great events together, these particular events. He's also partly responsible for the park. Have you been to the park? You have. Imagination Park.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely, for sure.
So I just wanted to acknowledge Dave and his contribution to the continuing Star Wars legend.
Didn't he?
You're going to be immortal for a long time.
Didn't Dave come up with the name?
Huh?
I think Dave came up with the name.
As I said, it was his inspiration. Are you here, Donnery, or have you not? Yeah. I am. Dave Donnery.
Yeah.
Okay. Show us.
Also, we could tell stories forever, but taking about fame, here we did the first Star Wars in L.A. We're all in our 20s. I'm turning 30. And one of the very young guys, and it was almost all guys, and so we're moving up north, and he thinks, man, Star Wars, we all worked on Star Wars. It's really famous now. I'll really be able to meet girls now, Well, give him about 2-3 years, and I encountered him, in a social situation, and he said, God, that thing about meeting girls with the Star Wars? He said, the only people that are really impressed are like 14-year-old boys, and I'm not interested. That girls in their 25s, they just weren't super impressed,
But having some to work with was a good break for them. Right?
Yeah.
Getting some women
for sure. Because one begat another, and it started to grow, and then other departments.
It's great to see gender parity, right, folks?
Yeah. But see, computer graphics really made that difference. When it very first started, I used to think they were never going to get their genes into the gene pool because it was all guys in computers. And then all of a sudden, out of the colleges started coming 50-50 women, men. So it really changed. Changed the whole complexion of the place.
I know that you folks have questions too, but we're going to show some pictures. Why don't I let you set it up, show us some pictures, and then we'll ask some more questions.
Do I have to stand up?
No, I'm just getting out of your way.
Okay. So here, this was a film, Wild Wild West, not a super good or popular film, but you still do good work for it, and it involved the collapse of part of Monument Valley. And all of this was carved with like big machetes, and I sent machetes off to a knife sharpener to get them sharpened. And next scene, next slide.
I meant that physically you were carving like this.
Carving. In the early part, you can carve with both hands. But the trick here was, and I don't want to labor this too long, but the real trick is that foam rocks bounce. And people don't necessarily know it consciously, but in their bones, they know that giant rocks, like in Yosemite, come off a cliff. They do not bounce. They just impel themselves into the ground. They're so huge. And so that was the thing. They asked me to do this, but they didn't say, here's the problem, solve it. I realized that I had to come up with a way of making the rocks not bounce. And I thought, beanbags. Yeah, beanbags. But what I did was, there's a hammer called a dead blow hammer. It's a plastic mallet, and it has lead shot inside of heavy oil. And it's like you go to the hardware store and you can buy an all-plastic mallet. And so what I did was I put different size of plastic containers inside of each rock, depending on how big or small they were, with lead shot and thick oil. so that when they fell to the ground, then they didn't bounce, much like a beanbag doesn't. So anyway, that's just, solving it's not moving. Oh, I have to do it the wrong way. Oh, sorry. It's not going. There we go. So that's kind of what it looks like. And in reality, underneath of the ground there are little elevators. There's cables that pull wedges through the thing. There's all kinds of mechanisms on the inside of each of these towers, but they've just exploded and they're starting to come down. Oops. Technical difficulties. It's just going. Anybody know?
Can you help us out here, Jackson, please?
Try the other button, the other arrow.
Oh, you know what? I have it upside down.
Doesn't it make all of us feel a little better?
Yeah. Yeah, really. Ouch. Try the other button. This is Men in Black. And you saw that, and you're starting to see, you can see a little bit of what it really was, but now you can see a staircase over there, there's a person standing over there, and down the middle of here we have an opening, much like in a Volvo automatic transmission, it had those little fibers that go back and forth. Well, there's a guy underneath of this in a little sled that we made that has a plastic shield, and he has a little viewing screen in front of him, and he has like a steering wheel. And there's a cable underneath there that gets him up to about 40 miles an hour in like 4 feet, 10 feet. And he then has to drive this thing into the earth. And then he comes to a dead stop just as quickly as he did. We went into it. But it's, and then the set had to be remade. One day we did 11 takes in this set, and all the dirt falls through to the bottom. We have to transport so there's that groove, and you can see the ship is way there in the background, just a little shadow. That's me without a beard. This element was shot separately, going through the Unisphere, so you don't have those big cables. Now here's that airplane shot, and in this case, I knew that the mountains in the foreground, the plane would be hitting that, so it can't move at all, and so it was made out of coal. I went down south of around Daly City when the trains would come in, and they would just pile these big things of coal. I don't know why in the wintertime San Francisco got deliveries of big blocks of coal, but I'd go down there and aesthetically select out the coal that I want. You'd go back, you'd be all covered with coal dust. But you think, well, why don't you send some of your troops down in? And you say, well, you need to send somebody that wants to pick out the right rock, and hit it so that it chips right and everything like that. And so I was the one. So this is kind of what the setup looks like. You can see the airplane there, the track that the plane is on, the track the camera's on. And like I said, the first part was coal with baking soda, and then the next part in the back was a very thick aluminum foil, about 12 times thicker than your kitchen foil, all crinkled up and then painted black, stretched out, and covered with baking soda. It was extremely hot, like 95-degree days when we were doing this shot. In the distance, you can see there's the coal in the foreground, the aluminum foil, the midground, and the background is a painting. And we did that by projecting at nighttime a picture from the Andes, and then we went up on a rig and circled the different colors, put dark black, light black, medium gray, MG, and so it was paint by numbers. In the morning, we came in and we had all these little circled areas, and somebody started painting them with different, like 5 different colors of gray and black, and all of a sudden you got a photograph. Now, this is the Walker from Empire Strikes Back. This is the 4-footer. And we used, like this, when you have an action scene and explosions and everything, you have to use really big ones. Normally they were about a little under 2 feet tall. So that's, we cut a cable at the top, and all of a sudden the explosions go off and it collapsed by itself. But sometimes not everything goes right. And in this case, it sat down like a puppy dog. And it first sat down, and then its head blew off. It was the incorrect sequence. Oh, here you can see too that the walker in the distance is actually the one that's under 2 feet, and yet the one in the foreground is 4 feet. In reality, they're not very far apart, but we call it a forced perspective. So you think that it's further in the distance, and also the painting is just barely back there. And we had people that could, start a painting like that. They just have a little kind of sketch like that. They'd start in the morning and have no hesitation to whip out those brushes, and they're flashing, and all of a sudden a painting like this would reappear in a couple of days. This.
Can we kill the spot again?
Oh, yeah.
Again to help bring up the...
There we go. This was Raiders Lost Ark, and it was the melting, exploding, shrinking head. And in this case, it was kind of industrial gelatin, and we dyed it different colors, a different color to be the outer skin, and a different color to be the viscera on the inside, and a different color to be the veins, and then there was a plaster skull on the inside. And we used industrial heat guns and heaters and shot it over a period of time and ran it back faster. But here you can start to see the plaster skeleton underneath of all the things, So we also had to make a ghost for the background. So you're presented with these things like make ghosts. So in this case, the first one is the receptionist, all dressed in silk, and we had her on like a big swing that was underneath of her belly, and so that worked for the ghost coming towards you, but it didn't work for the ghost swirling around. And we tried a whole bunch of within the model shop. We tried blowing air against silk, and it just didn't have worked. And we had this big water tank for other shots. The glass in this water tank is about inch and a quarter thick. It's really, really thick because it has thousands of gallons of water. And so this guy, Steve, just made up a little skull, a little silk skirt, and then waved it around in the water, and it worked perfectly for the scene where the ghost swirls around their heads. This is Temple of Doom. We had to overcome water difficulties here. We had about the weight of 2 Volkswagens come flying down this tunnel, and water would normally come in these big balls, and like tennis, billiard balls come flying at them. And so we came up with a system of having really strong air pressure. We rented a giant air tank, like about 10 feet tall by 5 feet in diameter, and pressurized the air. And it atomized. This is a bad shot. It atomizes the water as it comes down. This kind of shows how big that tunnel was, because as we built the tunnel in further and further, we had to have smaller model makers be the ones that had to go inside. And eventually, a woman named Randy, who was about 5'2", she was and thin. She was the last model maker that had to work inside the tunnel as it got narrower and narrower. And that's what it would look like from the camera's point of view. I had the producer on this show with Spielberg came one day, and they were looking at this tunnel and really like by themselves. And I came over and I said, they said, "Oh yeah, that looks really great." And I said, "Yeah, the little light bulbs work and all this stuff." And that just for that little extra bit of reality, I have cockroaches with mouse outfits ready to come out of this little cage so there's mice running. and they looked at me and said, that might be a little too much, And I was just joking, that I didn't actually make little mouse outfits for the cockroaches. But it would have worked, The cockroach stays down on the ground and glue a mouse outfit on. This is the tunnel sequences you saw what the live action was like. And this is, again, the aluminum foil. And this guy, Tom, has to come in and position the stop motion characters for every frame. So it takes quite a bit of time. The car moves an inch or so. He steps in, moves the characters a little bit. It moves an inch or a half an inch over and over and again. So shots like this take hours and hours and hours of concentration to do by the stop motion animator. And we had the difficulty of knowing that the caves and everything would be so tight that you really couldn't get a camera in there. So one of the guys who had an engineering background came up with this, a Nikon with an extended magazine that went out the back, and then they created this little mine car, and it was all it was motion controlled too, so it had all these different axes, and it was pulled down by a wire down the center of the track, and so it could follow the mine car, but it could also follow at a different rate, so it could gain on or lose speed on the mine car. It was actually the guy they won a technical Academy Award for that camera. Because it was used, the same kind of camera was used on other shows after that. They realized that you just use a Nikon camera for it.
A lot of videos are being shot now with those SLR.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what started.
I think somebody was even making a movie with an iPhone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This was Barbara, the very first female that we hired. The walls here are made out of that 12 times thicker than your aluminum foil, and the brown paper painted, and we could tear holes in the wall and put more light in there and that kind of thing. Here's the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom when the airplane hits the top of the mountain, and this is another thing with baking soda and a thing called microballoons and coal. This was my coal trick again, and I knew that if the plane actually hit the mountain, it would shake because it was on wires. And so what I do is I put a needle on one of the wheels. You can't see it. And underneath of the very top of the snow is a balloon. So when the plane actually starts to hit the snow, the needle hits the balloon, and then there's a cavity down below that allows the excess air and a bungee cord on the balloon that shoots the balloon down and allows the pressure to be released, so you don't have the balloon flying in the air and all that stuff. But it made the little puff, again, those aren't things that they ask you, would you solve this problem? They just say, we need to have the airplane hit the top of the mountain, and then you anticipate what would be the problems. But that's what it would look like, the track with the camera and the guys running along, pushing the camera back. And I don't think you can see the wires that the airplane's on, but it's just after it's hit the snow, you can see that puff of snow. Yeah, and the puff is microballoons, there's baking soda and microballoons, but microballoons are glass spheres that appear white that are 26 microns. And I think there's 10,000 microns per inch. So they're really, really small and really light. They make great perfect miniature snow. So here is the concept of C-3PO. And George wanted, for the very first Star Wars, number one Star Wars, Phantom Menace, he wanted Anakin making at the very beginning. And we talked about this earlier. There's a system of Japanese puppets called
Bunraku.
There we go. Yeah, Bunraku. Yeah.
Just learned it today. Not very well.
You did. Bunraku. And it's half-size Japanese figures for kabuki plays, and they're rod puppets. And these men called shadow men that have big black drapes over them operate them from the back side. But it's like going to see a half-scale kabuki play. So we decided that, you know what, we could operate this thing by that same system. So like the head is attached to that hat, the arms, the body is attached to his body, the hands are attached to his hands, the knees and the feet. And so we made this thing up to just see who would salute it. If everybody said, oh yeah, I can picture it, you guys can do it. So the next stage was actually building this C-3PO that you could see through, and then behind it is the guy dressed in green that operates it, and then he's against a green screen too. So basically he disappears, much like the shadow men were for the Bunraku puppets. But eventually Anthony Daniels, who was the actor who did C-3PO, he was the one in the outfit, or in the blue-green outfit behind him. We're entering into another phase of, so we're going to stop for a minute.
Okay.
And talk for a bit.
Sure.
We're now, this is Phantom Menace, so what we're heading on into the last three.
Naboo.
Naboo, Mustafar, all that kind of stuff. There was, just remind me, this is out of context, but one time it occurred to me that in every Star Wars film there's some kind of a dismemberment. Darth loses a hand, Luke loses a hand, actually Darth loses his legs and his hands. C-3PO gets his head lopped off in in Attack of the Clones. And I was on a stage when it occurred to me, and we were talking with Anthony Daniels, who was the actor that played C-3PO, and I thought, what is this dismemberment thing? There's always, every single one of them, there's something like that happens.
Oh,
yeah.
did you get a satisfactory answer?
Well, it was just the two of us.
Oh, I see.
So it wasn't. It isn't. That isn't.
Together,
You don't go up to ask George Lucas like, what is the dismemberment fixation?
Does anybody have a cell phone? You have his number, don't you?
Yeah.
No. George, we got a question over here at Drake. Can we maybe turn up the house lights a little bit and I know people have got questions.
I don't have a watch, and I also have a bad sense of time. So
that's my job.
Yeah, it's his job, and actually, maybe not even an hour yet, right?
It's 8:15. So we're a little over an hour.
Because sometimes, sometimes these things can go on, if you really want to, they can go on forever. But I think the longest I've ever talked was 4.5 hours. In India for the embassy they were desperate to hear about something from the States, so they said more. But sometimes what I say is that some people didn't come here for a 3 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour. They're not.
Or they would have brought a change of clothes. Yeah. And they could have stayed all night.
So don't feel bad that we reached the hour and 20-minute phase, and you need to get a babysitter, and that kind of. You just get up, you walk away. We don't feel bad about it at all.
Okay, that kills our snappy ending. We had a whole song rehearsed and everything. Let me take this microphone out and get from you folks what it is you would like to ask Mr. Peterson, who's that's a real Nordic name, isn't it there? Peterson.
It is.
From what latitude?
My father came from Sweden, near the Arctic Circle, about 40 miles from the Arctic Circle.
Amazing.
Get somewhere warmer.
Who would like to ask a question of this amazing wizard of special effects? Anything about yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
Do you think that model making's demise is imminent with
Yeah.
all of the animation that's becoming so easy to do now?
Well, sometimes it seems that way. There certainly are more model makers out there than when I first started. And many of them are underemployed or unemployed right now. One of the problems is as directors, younger and younger directors that aren't familiar with models, it's hard to convince them that sometimes models work better and sometimes CG works better. And probably the only thing that'll change it is if the audience, every once in a while there's a movement to go back. The audience, younger audience will say like, no, we like the old Star Trek spaceships, and the CG ones seem dispassionate, unemotional. They don't have that visceral feel to them. And but my personal trajectory was perfect. Started doing it in '75 and retired in 08, 09, right around there. So it was like this for me, personally. But I have all kinds of friends who, like I said, everybody was younger than me, and first you hire people that are 5 years younger than you, and then they're 10 years younger, and then they're 15 years younger, then they're 25, and then they're telling you that yeah, my dad has cancer. Well, how old's your dad? And it's the same age as you, that kind of thing. But I was always really bad at predicting the future. I didn't think that computers were going to be used just for bookwork. And at ILM when they first showed up, and I was really wrong about that. But it's a tough right now. It's like that. It's 1974, 75 again when the energy crisis. Because in some ways we grew so big with so many model makers, and around the world, all of a sudden there were people that were model makers in Czechoslovakia and Ethiopia and Scandinavia, and ILM became this magnet for people of talent that just and the Bay Area is like that too. I have, it's a small aside. I have some very conservative cousins that live in Arizona, and they're socialist, practically communist people in the Bay Area, and you think, no, they're most entrepreneurial people you've ever seen. You'll be run over if you aren't keep moving in the Bay Area, and people are creating companies, and I've never met so many people that started businesses and stores.
We're busy little bees
Yeah.
here, aren't we? We are indeed. Who's got some more questions? A question. Let's. Yes, sir. You can just stand up and yell it out.
Kathy Kennedy, president of Lucasfilm, said that she's going to use more models and matte paintings for the new Star Wars film. Has she got in contact with you?
Yeah, I've been to a meeting. Kathleen Kennedy has been Spielberg's longtime producer. She and her husband, and we had the meeting. They wanted to go up to the ranch to see the models and all that kind of stuff with their art director and their production designer. And since I was there at the birth of the whole thing, then I could say this is this and that's that and that's that. But you have to. It's almost like you have to be right at the gate to know, is this really going to happen or not? In Hollywood, a lot of things are said. People say things that arrive in the press, that all of a sudden it'll be across the press and blazing, models used for next Star Wars. And you think, great, got in the newspaper one more time, free publicity and all that stuff. So you hope, and I know they've set up a model shop in London, but also they've talked to the people that are at Kerner now, 3210 is what it's called, and they have done a number of movies lately, and they're really got their fingers crossed that they would get to do some of it. But whether or not it actually happens, you have to wait at the exact moment when it happens. With the last couple of Star Treks, there was a lot of energy between people saying, yeah, we want the models back again, we want that look, and some of the bean counters kind of went, nah, we do this, we do that. And it isn't at all that models are more expensive. You just have to, design for them. Somebody had said about CG that you can get every iteration you want to. It's like the director can have complete control. He can have everything done, and then he says, I really want all the spaceships to have kind of a purplish color to them, and they push the P button for purple, and not really, but the film can be made practically, and they can make those little changes. Whereas if they did that with models, you have to plan ahead. So it does take more storyboarding, more thinking of what you're going to do, and you can see some directors would really like to have that kind of control. So
I saw a special on George Lucas some years back, maybe 5 years ago, out at the ranch, and it might have been longer than that, because I think it was a Star Wars movie he was working on or overseeing, and he kept bringing out these gigantic walls, on rollers of storyboards.
Oh yeah,
They had thousands of them. They kept bringing the rollers out, and that kind of meticulous work. How much of that does the director do himself? Does he sit down? I mean, I don't mean drawing it specifically, but saying, I want the scene to look exactly like this.
Almost never.
Never.
Yeah, almost never. I remember, I didn't save it, but Spielberg one time did a drawing of what he wanted, and it was like a round head and a stick and an arm, and that kind of thing. There are some directors who can draw. Tim Burton can draw really well. Yeah. Joe Johnston can draw really well. But that you have to delegate. It's like it would take you a lifetime, because the storyboards, like the storyboards for Empire and Jedi, a guy named Nilo Rodis and Joe Johnston were the art directors, and sometimes they had to make books of binders that thick of drawings. And Nilo one time says, okay, all we're doing is drawing the shadows now. We use these really big wide pens. We're not drawing lines anymore. We're not drawing smalls. We're doing and they were beautiful drawings, and yet all they were doing, like with a big wide marker, was making the shadows. So then your imagination puts in what the line and the shape that's the light part. But they have to, sometimes they're just drawing after drawing, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes to make it to meetings. And sometimes you'd get a whole stack of drawings in a thing, and 50% of them would be changed. So then they would be drawn, and a director just can't do that. But he goes through several chains. Like there's a concept artist. In this case, was Ralph McQuarrie, and he does these beautiful little beautiful paintings. And then George would go like that idea, like that idea, like that idea, and then that would be handed off to other people, and then they showed the other art directors, and then they would draw up things. And George had a stamp, a red stamp. They'd lay out the stuff that they had done that week, and he'd come by, and one of the stamps said Fabuloso, and the red stamp, and he would just go
Fabuloso.
So then the next week they would gather all the Fabuloso ones and say, and develop that as an idea. And then he would come another week and Fabuloso, to distill it down with what he wanted. But one of the art directors told me, he says they learned to never have the originals anymore because he just smudged with the red, the big red stamp.
Who else has a question? What kind of materials used in the making of the models?
They ran the gamut really from just as basic as wood and balsa wood to machined metal to vacuum formed plastic to injection molded plastic, to surfboard foam to thin aluminum to saran wrap. I made waves of an ocean with crinkled up saran wrap one time. So in some ways that was what my job was. I had worked in the industrial design business a little bit before that, so I had the advantage over the other model makers when I showed up. I knew, I could touch plastics and tell you what kind of plastic it was and look at it and things like that. What is the characteristic of this plastic or that plastic? And also, there's a funny little story about that too. This isn't directly, we just used a whole variety of different materials. Anything that a machine shop would use, that kind of stuff. Gears, little gyroscopes sometimes, miniature gyroscopes. But one of the things because I was hired for just 2 months to do a specific problem. And when I arrived, I could see what the other model makers were doing was they were using 5-minute epoxy. They'd put parts on in 5-minute epoxy, they'd mix it up and put a tape on it and hold it into place, and then they'd go to another one, get that ready, mix up or they'd maybe have some of the 5-minute epoxy hadn't set off yet, and tape. And I went, because I had been in industrial design business, I knew that there was super glue in 74, it came out in about 73, something, but you could only buy it at an industrial level. It was called Eastman 910. It was much faster than regular super glue. And I think it was used in the medical and pearl industry originally. So a couple of days after watching this, because I talked to my partner, I said, God, have you seen how they're making things in there? And so I brought in a bottle of super glue, and I said, everybody stop for a minute. I want to show you something. And I took a pencil, a yellow Dixon Ticonderoga pencil, and held it out on the table like that, put one drop, and then I moved my hand, and the pencil stayed like that. And everybody was, wow, how did you do that? It was like, and that really changed everything. So all of a sudden our speed was much faster, and all the models were made with super glue, and they've lasted for 38 years or something like that. I was fortunate that the material lasted a long time. But you can imagine the comparison of 5-minute epoxy to super glue is a world of difference. And in some ways I thought, well, I wonder if that's one of the reasons why I stayed for 20 and almost 40 years, because
The super glue guy.
the super glue guy. Yeah. But I knew those kind of materials and processes, whereas other people didn't necessarily know them. And so I became a more valuable person because of that.
It's called being indispensable, sir.
Indispensable. Make yourself indispensable.
We had a question down here. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I heard that in the original Star Wars that Jabba, was in that movie, and yet George wasn't happy with the way he looked, I guess.
Yeah.
And the story I heard is they waited until to re-release it, 20 years later, until the technology had come to the point where he was happy with how Jabba. Is that just a sidebar, or is that really?
Yes. Yeah, there's a scene where Han Solo has already made the deal with Luke and Ben Kenobi, and then they're going to go into the mouth of the Millennium Falcon. And at one time, he was talking to Jabba the Hutt there. And I've seen the footage, and it doesn't at all have the impact like it does now. But later on, for the barge scene and with the princess and the little outfit and everything, they did this big rubber Jabba, and he has two people, one person at the tail and another person at the mouth on the inside. But yeah, it in some ways, for the re-release of Star Wars and then Empire, George interjected a lot of CG into that. The way I describe it is, a baby has to crawl before it can walk. And so he put some of the earlier CG into that so that he could develop the talent that would eventually produce the computer graphics for the last three films.
When you talk about Jabba, it reminds me of when he redid the film. Not only did he rip immortality from me and my fellow voice actors, but also changed what to a lot of people was inviolate, whether you're the creator or not, sacrilegious. And a couple of guys I know, I think one of them or two of them worked at ILM, had a T-shirt that read, "Han shot first."
Yeah.
This is the controversy. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? In the original A New Hope, it was Sean who shot Greedo first.
Yeah,
Not the other way
that
around.
Han Solo shot Guido first.
Which made him a much edgier, much more violent kind of a guy, more realistic, heroic guy, I guess.
Yeah. But you can in those kind of movies you can shoot rubber people. You can robots and
But
aliens.
George changed it so that it was Greedo who actually went to shoot first.
Yeah, went to shoot first.
And he was defending
But
himself. We have a question from a special guest here, himself. Yoda, do you have a question?
How do you make the lightsabers?
How do we make the lightsabers?
You're a creepy-looking young man, let me tell you. That's a great mask.
The lightsabers.
Yeah, good question. How do you make the lightsabers?
Way back to the first show, the actors either didn't have a lit up thing, all they had was a handle, and then animation puts the laser in later on, the glowing light. And sometimes they had a stick there that had the little shiny stuff that, like on the back of a license plate, that lights up. That would give the animators a clue as to where it should be at one time or another. That would help them. But animators on an animation stand put that in. Many times the actors just had the handle. They didn't actually have the lit up section. That came in later.
And we should mention again our local friend, as I said, he lives very near here, Ben Burt, who, I don't know how many of you have seen this. I'm sure Lorne knows about it, but I saw some years ago, I don't know, it was YouTube or something, and it was the original shots from Star Wars inside the spaceship with the stormtroopers marching forward. Okay?
Yeah.
You could hear the plywood.
Yeah.
It was the most rickety-looking thing because it sounded that way.
Yeah.
The sound, the ambient sound of what the set really was. Along comes Ben Burt, and I mean, this is a whole team of magicians, and the audio is so important too, isn't it, Lauren?
Yeah.
Because he came
definitely.
along and he would go out and record the most bizarre things, compress them, reverse them, and that would be the sound saber or the lightsaber. He did so much to add dimension to those films.
Yeah, he really did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think lightsaber was the guy wire coming down from a telephone pole, and he had the microphone on it, and he would hit it with a wrench, and it'd go like that vibration. And
But once that audio, once the audio was laid in, it completely changes everything. The visual illusion has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, who else? Yes, ma'am.
In some of the scenes you showed us, the miniature models were very small, but then there were human beings next to it. But it looked to scale. So how do you layer having a human being next
very small humans. It's the only.
You know, they're put together either in the olden days they were done in optical, and optical is you know, a process of kind of in cameras and joining things together and making a mat, and it's almost like I wish I had a slide that could just show all the different phases, because it's you know, you could sit here and explain it, and you know, you'd eventually be yawning about the thing, but how it's done. But it's an old process that photographers have used for a long time. The difficulty is making a moving picture that does that. But now the computers can much more easily do that and more perfectly do it. There is no little line around the human beings or anything like that. So they can, you know, like the Egyptian one. You saw the woman running with the dog across, and then she's running on green, and then they extracted that out, and then they put it into the scene where they want it to, so that they could make her taller or shorter depending on, you know, how far back in the frame that she is. But
Has the use of, I remember actually, I had a word with George Lucas. It took maybe 3 seconds. But I said, it was after, at the party about Naboo, you know, after Phantom Menace. Mm-hmm. And he just walked by, and our eyes met for half a second. Yeah, you know, I said, no film in the camera, huh? And he stopped, and he said, no film in the camera, right? Because that was the first film I think they had made that was purely digital. There was no chemical emulsion film. Yeah. Okay. Has that changed special effects in any way?
Oh, for sure. You know, a lot of that equipment that we built went out into the rain. You know, when the computers came in, and there'd be a truck that would arrive with pallets full of you know, big Silicon Graphics computers and all that stuff. And then also we increased in size. You know, we started out at 70 people, and then we stayed for quite a long time at 200, that kind of thing. And then CG came along, and it was like all of a sudden 400, 800, you know, 1,200, 1,600. It was the size increased incredibly, and also the international community increased. I mean, there are people from Argentina, from Croatia, from Japan, from you know, Scandinavia, England. Just talent came from all over the world. It was amazing how many different people were from different countries.
But you, as a man who's been in the business for many years, how do you feel about the difference between digital and film when you see it on the screen?
Well, every once in a while the digital is good. It's very clear and all that kind of stuff. Every once in a while, when it's done in special effects, you know, it's okay. I like the combination of digital and a model, but it probably ultimately has to do with the film. You know, it's like Transformers. You know, maybe younger people here wouldn't agree at all, but I just couldn't stand those films. You know, it's just noise and movement and crashing and banging, and I didn't care about those big beasts.
Michael Bay?
What's that?
Michael Bay?
Michael Bay doing that film. And there's a number of films like that are just a crash-bang roller coaster ride, and it's just not my kind of film, and they tend to be all CG done.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Whereas you worked on Pearl Harbor,
yeah,
which was also Michael Bay film.
Also Michael Bay.
But at that point, you're constrained by what you can do with the camera, so you're not flying cameras all the
Yeah.
time. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of constraints.
Yeah, we were talking earlier in the day about that originally I remember the cameraman supervisor saying, you know, the model is this big. We put the camera down at what would be the height of a miniature human. If a human being was in that set, how far off with the ground would they be with the dolly? You know, so say it's a 1 inch to a foot person, and so a person's 6 inches tall. Let's put them on a dolly, so that adds an extra 2 feet. So 8 inches off the ground, that's where we'll have the camera. And eventually, the camera just goes everywhere. You know, Spielberg started doing a lot of that, where you kind of come in from the far outside and then you go into the room and you go through the window and you're inside. And we
What is that called?
the cosmic zoom.
I'm sorry. Say again.
Cosmic zoom.
Cosmic zoom.
And we talked to Orson Welles actually.
Yeah.
That did that kind of thing.
One of the very first, and his photographer was James Wong Howe,
Yeah.
who gave him a list of things not to do, and Wells said, "Let's do them."
Yeah, he said, let's do them. Whereas, special effects up until, somewhere in the late 90s, the camera was, a logical spot, and now it just goes everywhere. Video games are like that, too. The camera just is moving and flying through the air. It's like a miniature helicopter. And it's kind of what an audience accepts, too. It's like if they accept this, well, then they'll accept that. And then they'll accept that, then you move it another category. So audiences no longer need to have the camera down where a miniature human would be in the set. But
Any more?
don't be afraid, you got to leave.
Yoda? We'll see you, Yoda.
Yeah,
Yes,
bye.
young man.
Would they make, like, you were showing they had the little people in the mine car?
Yeah.
Would they make those people?
Yes.
What would they make them out of?
Or shrink them. And we kept them from growing up. Kept giving them stunting pills so the people stayed small. No, in this, I think there's another section in which they're little rubber. First, they carve them in clay, sculpt them in clay, and then they mold them, and then they make them in this very soft rubber. But inside, they have a metal armature, a metal framework, and it has soft joints in it and everything like that, so that his head, he can move the head by little increments back and forth. So when he goes to turn his head, he does like that. And in a film, when they run the film all together, it makes it look like he's moving his head like that. But yeah, they sometimes we do them big. There are people like this with a metal armature on the inside, but usually they're small. The Tauntaun at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, that beast that Luke is riding, it's about this tall. And part of it's just that what your hands can do. When a creature gets really big, it gets so hard to manipulate them that it's about the right size that they do stop motion puppets. But you're right, in the mine car are those little people, and we carve those to begin with.
Shall we close with your illusion?
Oh, I wanted to give, I've done this before where you give something for people to take home with them. There's the crowd here, the average age is in the 40s somewhere, maybe 45, 50. And so, you can take it home to your children and all that kind of stuff. And one is, there's a scene where Darth Vader, at the very end of Star Wars, he's talking to his staff about the possibility of the death of the Death Star has been suggested to Darth. And I think he says, your lack of confidence disturbs. Your lack of faith is very disturbing. Something like that. So anyway, that's that particular scene.
Okay.
And so what we'll do.
I'll be Darth.
He'll be Darth. The scene where he lifts
Rick
him.
Moranis, Darth.
Yeah. He lifts the minion up off the ground. Okay, he's still. No, we're not doing that.
We're not going to do that first. I'm sorry, boss.
Okay.
Okay.
The throat, the Darth Vader, the throat.
Right. Okay.
Your lack of
Faith.
is disturbing.
Can I have a little time with the line? Can I come back? Okay.
And the hand of the throat.
Your lack of faith is disturbing.
That's your standard water bottle. You can also do that. You're older. Your average age is late 40 or something, and your children are your neck. So it's very effective. It's a cheap trick, though. Very cheap trick.
Very cheap.
Okay. Now the champagne bucket.
Because everybody thinks we brought the champagne to drink, but it was actually just to eliminate questions as to why we brought that.
So the other one is a champagne bucket or any kind of a ceramic bucket or anything is hard. Your kid is over there, and let's say your kid's name is Luke or something, and Luke,
I am your father.
So anyway, you can use a
champagne bucket, a plastic bottle, a career that spans 40 years of making magic for all of us, and we have all been charmed and just transformed by the magic of this man right here. It's such an honor to have you with us tonight. Lorne Peterson.
Thanks.
Peterson.
Yeah, thanks for coming on a rainy night.